Tip 1, mark your loom. There's different types of looms and there's different ways to do this. So you're going to have to find which best works for you if you don't have a loom that has any kind of markings on it. This loom, I could easily use masking tape or a permanent marker, and basically you're just marking one side to keep track of your loops. I easily get distracted. I have 3 small children and a lot goes on in this house, and when I'm counting a lot of loops, I don't want to have to count both sides. 9 times out of 10, I'm double counting anyhow to make sure I counted right. I don't want to count 4 times different loops, especially when I'm working with nearly 400 loops. I don't want to be counting that often. So I'm going to set this one aside, but again, you can use masking tape or a permanent marker or anything that you feel comfortable with. This is my loom of choice. It's a Shenanigans loom. It has the measurements in centimeters already listed on here. And I always have it on the bottom and the 0 to my left and the 15 to my right. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and add my slip knot. Yarn out of the way here. I'm going to insert the bottom of my loom into the rods like so. And then I'm going to take the working yarn and wrap it behind. Now you always want your knot in the center, so because you're doing a slip knot, you can play with it, but that's basically my center. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to insert my hook and and I'm going to chain 1 in the center, and I technically have 2 loops on my hook. 1, 2. I know with my 0 right there that when I have my working yarn on that side, I have the same amount of loops. So I'm just going to do a couple more. If you need to know how to hairpin lace crochet, I have video tutorials on that as well. But okay, so I'm doing my second one. I have 2 loops on each side. I have the 0 on my left hand side. So when I have a whole bunch of loops on this loom, as long as I end with my working yarn on the 0 side, and like I said, you can masking tape or permanent marker, as long as you're ending on that side, you know you have an even amount of loops and you're not counting 2 different sides, possibly more than once when you have a bunch of loops on your loom. Tip 2, use contrast color yarn to wrap around your loom to keep your loops organized. This will come in handy when you're storing your strips of hairpin lace. You can see that I have it all strapped there. So this is kind of how I store them. We'll talk about it later in a video. But it really does help to have contrast color yarn to keep it separate and neat and the loops organized when you're working with it later and storing it. You need a loom that has posts that will go past your bottom and top brackets. This one is my favorite, so I'm going to show you that. I already have my starter loop on, and I'm going to show you the beginning way to add this contrast yarn, and then later in this tutorial I'm going to show you another way to do it. So basically all I'm doing is I'm taking this yarn, again I need it so it is up against the bars, and all I'm doing is I'm making any kind of knot that will easily release later on. I'm keeping the tension kind of tight because I want it up against that bar. So when I'm working, these strands are not getting in my way. So basically, when I do loops, I'm not going to make any loops right now, but when I do loops, they're going to go around this, and that's going to help with keeping all of the loops secured. Tip number 3, counting your loops. I need nearly 400 loops on this hook, and I need to count to see where I'm at. I know this is not 400, I know it's not even close. I'm going to pull up a loop and remove my hook for right now. And if you've had same amount of tension, this will make it a lot easier. But what you're going to do is you're going to kind of push all of your loops as far over to the end as possible and kind of hold them in place. And then what I do is I count by twos: 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, 20. So as you can see, as I'm pulling, I'm slowly letting up tension on this hand so I can count by twos. And it's really easy to count if you separate them like so. And like I said, if your tension is good, they're going to not be hanging over each other. I mean, you're still going to get it like that, but by pulling them all over to one side and then slowly letting a few release as you count, that really helps you count fairly quick. So as you can see, they're all pretty well separate. Whoops. And that is how I find it really easy to count loops on my loom. Tip 4, mark your loops. You're going to need a stitch marker or scrap yarn or something to mark the loop. So after I've done counting, I'm going to mark, you can mark however you want, 50s, 100s, it doesn't matter. I've gone ahead and counted all the way up to this loop right here. Like I said, I'm not going to count these for you. This is my 175th loop on this side. So I've gone ahead and marked that. I don't want to mark the actual loom because if this goes in the middle, like so, if I mark the loom, yeah, it's going to stop it, but what happens if it goes in the middle and shimmies down or up? So I'm definitely going to mark the loop that I want to remember. So that is my 175th. Oops, now I got it all tangled here. There we go. That is my 175th loop. So now I can keep going and I know that one is that, so I can continue counting as needed. And this is also really helpful if you are going to take off some of these loops off of your loom to create more than your loom can hold. You definitely want to count before you remove these because these will be really, really hard to count when they're off of the loom. So that's a tip. Mark your loops according to whatever increments you want. Tip 5, stringing up your loops. If you didn't do this particular method on stringing up your loops, you're going to want to, in most cases, add yarn or something to keep all these loops in order, facing the right way. So if you didn't do the beginning method, you'll need a yarn needle and some string. And all you're going to do is you're going to weave this through all of your loops. So I have a small amount here. I'm just going to weave them through. Pull my tail over here. I'm kind of following the bar, and you can do them in small increments or large. So here it's rather spaced out here. So I'm just following the bar up. You want to take care not to actually go through any yarn pieces. You don't want to be puncturing your yarn, your loops. You want to make sure you capture them all. And this is just another method on keeping all your loops fairly even and together. This is a little bit longer than I need, but you want longer rather than shorter, especially if you're going to add an extension on to your loom, or extend your loops, I should say. So I'm almost to the end here. So if this was all, oops, I punctured my yarn here. If this was all of the loops that I needed, I would then make a bow or some sort of knot that I could easily release. So I can remove these from the loom now, and all of my loops are basically staying in the correct order. When you're crocheting or connecting hairpin lace together, You don't want a couple dangling and off to the side. This kind of keeps them nice and even in there for easy storing as well. So again, if you didn't do the beginning method, you can definitely do this method, and either one works. Tip 6. If your loom is getting a little too crowded, you need to drop some of these loops off of your loom. Now there's a couple problems with your contrast yarn. So with this being up here, if you try and flip your hook and it's too crowded, or if this is just the problem getting in the way, you can pull this similar to a pulley and kind of tuck those strands down into the actual loop. So if you're having problems with that knot getting stuck, you can easily do that and flip your hook to the other side when creating loops. Now let's just say this is a lot of loops. I actually have my stitch marker here at 175, and I need nearly 400 loops on each side. So this is definitely getting quite cramped. I need to remove a portion of these loops, and I don't want them hanging all off the end. I want them to be neat and even and not get in my way when I'm flipping my loom. So what we're going to do is we're going to push this up and untie this. I pulled my knot all the way down to the opposite side. And I'm just going to unknot this and push this off to the side. And I'm going to remove the bottom of my loom. Now, I do not want any loops to come off of this yarn. And I don't have any here. So like in the previous tip, I need to kind of restrain them from flopping all over, and I'm just going to use my yarn needle and my contrast color just to grab a series of loops. So if you do need to extend or drop some loops because you have so many you need to add on, this is another way to do it. So again, I'm taking a lot of precaution not to pull any off of my loom yet. Okay, so I'm gonna kind of remove all of these loops, and I kind of want it fairly even. So right about there is where I want it at. I'm gonna hold one and pull the other. So then this strand is still capturing all of these loops, and I have this side, if you didn't do this starter one, all of these, I can pull this, as long as this stays there and this stays there, I'm removing the loops, all while keeping that on. All right, so now I'm gonna pull out this one. All right, so now I have my loops here and my loops here. Get rid of my yarn needle there. What I'm going to do is I'm going to insert the bottom of my loom back onto the posts, like so. And now I don't want these to come off this yarn. I don't want this to get in the way, so I did not pull this out completely, because then I'd have a strand of yarn hanging outside of the loops. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to tie this fairly tight and keep it rather close to the bottom of the loom, so I'm not having a whole bunch hanging off. This is a little bit longer than I intended, but I'm going to either trim it or I can kind of tuck it in there. So now I know I have 175, so I can continue counting this way, and I can shimmy this way down, and I have plenty of room now, and they're not falling all over when I lift it up. So that keeps them really nice and secure, and I can continuously work making my nearly 400 loops on each side. To remove the loops from your loom, either by using the contrast yarn that we started with or by adding it after, you can do this multiple ways. So I'm going to untie this, and again, you don't want to tie anything in a real big knot, because for the one we tied after for the extension, make sure I'm not pulling this out here. Okay. We're going to weave these through all of this. Just like so, and get all of our loops. Oh, I missed some. Okay. Try not to miss any. Make sure you're not missing any from either side, not just the side you're looking at. So again, this is the same thing as before, but we pulled a bunch off for making larger strips. I'm going to remove my stitch marker. This is where I added my second skein of yarn. I'm going to untie this one, and I just want to pull one. So I'm holding on to this one. I'm going to pull this one through because this one's already going through. So now I have this. I have all my loops already on. I'm going to shimmy down my loom post here. Try not to. There we go. And there we go. I'm just going to slide my loom off. I have all my loops. That way and that way. So that is how you remove loops from the loom. Tip 7, storing your hairpin lace. So if you've done this either from the beginning or wove contrast yarn through your loom at the end, you're going to pull off all your loops and secure the contrast yarn and just roll your section of hairpin lace, and that's going to keep, it's going to flop around a little bit, but it is going to keep your strip in a neat and orderly fashion. And this one's a little bit smaller, but this is a larger one. And again, this is the way to store them. It keeps them all nice. Bonus tip, changing colors with hairpin lace. So if you want to go ahead and change your colors in the middle of a strip, or if you're like me and I ran out of yarn. So I have the pink here that I'm going to be using, but for this tutorial I'm going to show you how to add a second color in, and I'm going to be using the blue. So the main part is it's exactly like single crochet, but you have to somehow keep the tension. Now there's different ways to do this, but I'm working on this being my last pink loop. So I'm going to insert my hook into the loop, yarn over, and pull up a loop. So this is where I want to change colors to the blue, except I need to keep tension on both yarns so I can get the tension on the hairpin lace loop. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to find my ends, and this is easier when you're not recording and you have it somehow on your lap or whatever you find easiest to do this. But I have looped both down there just to keep some of the tension. And now I'm going to yarn over and pull through. I'm going to put my hook on the back and turn. So now, because I've looped it around this post, I have the tension. I'm keeping the tension on both of those strands, and once I get a few more crocheted, I'm going to release that and get rid of that, and eventually I can weave in the ends there. You can also hold the ends with your hand, but flipping the loom, I find it really, really difficult to do, so that's why I kind of rope them down there. So let's flip this way so it's easier for me. instead of working it sideways. So now I have a few loops on my loom. I could technically go ahead and release that. Let me get one more now that I'm on this side. I'm gonna pull up a loop, a large loop, so I can get rid of it. Going to find my ends here. There we go. So now I can definitely go ahead and weave in these ends. And from either angle, you can't really tell that I changed the yarn from either side. A little bit on that side, but that is how you change colors in hairpin lace.